company is Cryptography, and we are specialists in digital transformation, relationship management, collaboration techniques. But definitely over the last year, really the last 6 months, there's been a really big interest in blockchain and how we get the best out of blockchain and how we collaborate with each other on this amazing technology. I've got my contact details at the bottom. Feel free to use them. Feel free to tweet anything that you find interesting coming up on the screen. That would be great. Feel free to ask questions as I'm going through on some of the concepts that I'm presenting. But you might have some questions that you may have read in the media, and I'm sure that I'll try and answer those as much as I can as we go through. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at Bitcoin, blockchain, and really the economic implications of this technology, and the good and intriguing concepts of this technology. And then we'll take a break. And then afterwards, we'll have a look at maybe some of the other sides of it, the crypto side of it, investing in crypto, some of the scams, and some of the things you've just got to look out for. But first things first, hands up, who's heard of blockchain? That's most of you. That's absolutely brilliant. So we're off to a good start. Who's heard of Vitalik Buterin? Oh, one or two. Okay, by the end of this, maybe you'll all know who he is. And who has any investments in any type of cryptocurrency? Okay, so there's a handful, great. Well, feel free to pitch in when we get to discuss some of those. Right, so let's start off. The Matrix. If anybody knows this film, there is a key scene where Morpheus is asking Neo, do you actually want to know the truth? You can either take the blue pill and you can fall asleep and wake up and everything will be as it was before. Or you can take the red pill and I'll show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. And after my MBA last year and studying this space for a good year and a half, I got into, we got into mining Bitcoin in the very early days, but we lost them all, we lost the wallet. I then considered getting back into Bitcoin a few years ago, and then there was a whole lot of hacks and scams, and it's a bit of the Wild West out there. But then I got back into it at the beginning of last year, and started to do a little bit more research. And what the type of concepts I'm going to probably talk to you tonight, and some of the ideas I'm going to talk to you tonight, really might set off some ideas of what this technology can be used for in the future and what kind of implications it will have. And once you start to get a little bit of knowledge around this area, you realize that there's a lot of many layers in this technology. There are some technical terms, so if I say a technical term and you don't understand that, please shout out. Please feel free to pull me up on that. I'll try and kind of discuss it as simply as possible. The reason I call my company Cryptography, does anybody know what the Cryptography is? 4. It's as simple as 2 plus 2. So what we do is we take quite difficult concepts and topics and we try and break it down into very, very kind of simple areas, just so that you kind of understand. But it is a bit of a rabbit hole, and there are lots to it. So let's start off at the beginning, and what is Bitcoin first and foremost. There we go, that way. So Bitcoin. Bitcoin is just one cryptocurrency, and there are many, but it was the original cryptocurrency. And when we talk about blockchain and Bitcoin, blockchain is the underlying infrastructure that Bitcoin uses to run. What we'll do is we'll go into a little bit of detail of how a blockchain is built. but Bitcoin is the standard out there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Bitcoin blockchain, and then we'll get into some of the other different types of blockchains, different types of algorithms, and different types of cryptocurrencies and blockchains that are out there. But Bitcoin itself, I tend to talk about Bitcoin with the 4 Ds. So first thing is it's digital. It's the first scarce digital resource that we have on this planet. When you think about gold and Bitcoin being a digital gold, well, gold is still mined. There is a finite resource of gold, and the current market capitalization of gold is about 6 trillion. So there's about 6 trillion worth of gold out there at the moment. Bitcoin kind of is starting to look like digital gold. It's the way it has been set up and the way it's used. It's starting to become quite a powerful form, a store of value. So it's the first ever digital resource. It was first thought about by a person called Satoshi Nakamoto. Now, I don't know if that was a he, if it was a she, if it was a they. The most likely thought on this is that it was a group of people with a lot of different skills, and we'll go into some of those skills like cryptography in a little bit more detail. But they kind of came together to build a very, very simple white paper, which they released in 2009, and it's called Peer-to-Peer, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And this was the first ever incarnation of Bitcoin. It was it's digital, so it's all in computers, and at that time Bitcoin was worth about 0.05 cents. It's also decentralized. So by decentralized, we mean that nobody governs Bitcoin. Nobody can shut it down, and nobody can well, at the moment, there are no regulations on how you actually use Bitcoin. But because it's decentralized, and by that I mean it's on thousands and thousands of computers around the world, no one jurisdiction, no one country, no one government can actually close it down at all. It is on thousands of computers out there, and by that I mean that each of those thousands of computers runs the Bitcoin blockchain, which is about 160 gigs at the moment. You can run it on a laptop if you wanted to, but you can download it. The Bitcoin blockchain is open source. Anybody can download it, and anybody can start running their own Bitcoin blockchain, but of course you need extra bits and pieces if you wanted to actually be part of the actual decentralized blockchain network for Bitcoin. It's deflationary. Now this is a very interesting concept because we're very used to having inflation in our current economy. £100 in the bank this year will not be £100 in the bank next year. It will be, £99, and 80 pence, or £99 and 70 pence, or whatever the inflation rate is, and we accept that. We accept a inflationary economy whereby central banks and banks themselves tend to print money, liquidity into the system, and the economy grows. Lovely. But a deflationary currency is a whole different concept. It starts off by, of course, a currency, a store of value, but because there's only 21 million Bitcoins that will ever be produced, no more, no less, gradually, over time, due to supply and demand, the price of Bitcoin will gradually tick up over time. It is a deflationary currency. It will gradually get more and more expensive every time you buy a Bitcoin. And the more people that use it, the more expensive it will get. And that is just market factors. And we'll go into some of those market factors later. But it's also divisible. So you don't have to buy one Bitcoin. You can buy 100 millionth of a Bitcoin, which is called a Satoshi, after Satoshi Nakamoto. So you can buy a percentage of a Bitcoin. Okay, so that's Bitcoin itself, and it runs on the blockchain infrastructure. So let me just kind of give you a view of what a blockchain, what the blockchain infrastructure kind of looks like. And it looks a little bit like this. You have miners, and miners are these machines, thousands of them all around the world. They are trying to complete a difficult mathematical problem. This difficult mathematical problem is normally done with brute force, so you need quite a lot of CPU. And in the industry we call this hash rate. So basically a whole load of servers that are running this algorithm to try and find the solution to this problem, this mathematical problem, and they tend to kind of guess at what the hash of the next block is, and once they actually have that answer, then they're allowed to create the block, kind of grab all of the transactions, the Bitcoin transactions. They get a little bit of money from creating the block in Bitcoin, and they get a percentage of those transaction fees. And so it's in the best interest of those miners in the actual decentralized network to actually work as fast as they can to find that solution so that they can build the next block. So they'll all complete the next block. They use things like Merkle or hash trees. They're just terms that we use within the industry. It's the type of algorithm that they use and the cryptography that they use to establish this new block. And once they have been given the right to create a new block, they'll grab all the transactions. They'll actually tell the rest of the network, I found the solution to the next block. I'm going to add the next block to the block, the link of blocks, the blockchain, and I'm going to link it cryptographically. So I'm going to link the next block to the previous block by way of a cryptographic algorithm that really can't be broken. And the reason it can't be broken is it's only a one-way cryptography. You would find you'd need quantum computers and many, many thousands of years to kind of break that type of cryptography. But we'll talk about a little bit more about that in a minute. So there we have the blockchain. That is how a blockchain is built by these thousands of computers all around the world with open source software, creating the blocks and processing these transactions. So far so good? Are we all on board? Yeah?
I've got a question.
Go for it.
Right. Why would there only be, how many Bitcoins are in existence now?
At the moment about 17 million.
So you're going to get 21 in stock?
Yes.
Okay.
21 million will come up in 2140. We actually know this because of the white paper that Satoshi Nakamoto wrote. There are proper mathematical calculations in where we know at any point in time in the future how many Bitcoins will be in the system.
Okay.
We can rely on it.
Who's decided you're going to stop?
That was decided right in the early stages, 2009, by Satoshi Nakamoto, who pulled this white paper together. He kind of came up with 21 million. Well, there are reasons why he picked 21 million. It's not too high, it's not too low. It's quite easily divisible. There are many factors.
Is that not a kind of form of centralization then? Not that I'm against that.
Only the decision to actually have 21 million, once you actually decide on a number, the decentralization comes from then transferring the algorithm or the rules of running this network to all the other computers. So then it doesn't become centralized.
So maybe it's going to be revealed later on in the lecture, but so far I can't see the correlation between the value of mining it compared to the value of Bitcoin. Why don't you have 21 million now?
Yeah, well, there's a reason why you gradually kind of mine it, you incentivize those miners, and we'll kind of get into a little bit of why that is. There are kind of economic reasons behind it. Now, this is where we kind of get a little bit, we start to go down the rabbit hole, because you can fork a blockchain. And what we mean by forking a blockchain is that when we get to a point where it forks, these are two different, really different rules by which the blockchain is built. So you could download the Bitcoin blockchain and you could fork it off. In other words, you can actually copy it onto another computer, and you could have different rules by which you accept payments, you transact, and you use the Bitcoin payments in the system. So this is kind of where maybe developers may differ their opinions, and they actually want to do something differently. So what they would do, they'd take a copy of it and they would work on their own fork with slightly different rules. They wouldn't be able to use the original Bitcoin, obviously, because you've got different rules, you're going to be creating a different currency with those different rules. And this is what happened to Bitcoin last year, around about August time. Bitcoin was actually forked and Bitcoin Cash was created. So Bitcoin has, you know when you go to airports and you get three letter acronyms for every single airport? We have the same thing in the crypto industry. So Bitcoin is BTC, and when that was forked and different rules and mechanisms were applied to it, Bitcoin Cash was actually created. And if anybody has cryptocurrency or had cryptocurrency back in those days, and you were here, let's say this is the fork, and you have Bitcoin here, and it forks into Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin, you got 1-to-1. So you've got whatever amount of Bitcoin you got the same amount of Bitcoin Cash, and they go off and they create their own blockchain to their certain rules.
Isn't that just half the value of each currency?
Yes and no. No, because you're not actually forking the currency, you're just forking the code that runs the currency. And so therefore you're basically creating a different code base, which means a different cryptocurrency.
So why don't you just restart with a new blockchain?
That's a very, very good point. The reason for that is that Bitcoin has been out since 2009. It's been out there in the wild, in the public. Many hackers have actually tried to ruin it and tried to hack it, and you haven't been able to, and so therefore Bitcoin blockchain is actually viewed as one of the most secure blockchains out there. And so therefore you want that kind of pedigree in any kind of future coin that you produce. So I'm working with current companies at the moment where if they wanted to create a new currency, they would always fork the Bitcoin blockchain because it's the most resilient and most secure out there. And there are reasons why of that security, and we'll go into a bit more detail about why it is secure. Yes?
Having forked it, are you then limited to the 21 million less the previously discovered ones, or does it
No.
does that counter then reset according to your own rules?
No, it's a brand new rule, a brand new system. So therefore, you can then go back to your own white paper and say, I want to print 40 million instead of 21 million. But that won't affect the Bitcoin price. Now, what you'll find is a lot of these cryptocurrencies then die, or they don't produce a product, or they're not as decentralized, or they're not as secure, and they may die, but they don't affect the original Bitcoin blockchain. So the original block that was created is the Genesis block that was created by Satoshi Nakamoto back in 2009, and you'll be interested to know that when he created it, he put a link in the first ever block, and it was a link to the Times newspaper. And if I can get my notes, it's there somewhere. It basically was a link to the Times newspaper, the front page on the 3rd of January 2009, which said, Britain's second bailout for banks. So automatically we now kind of realise that Satoshi Nakamoto had a pretty good understanding of, one, the UK financial system, and two, the fact that the banking infrastructure hasn't played as well as we would have liked. And as we all know, socializes the debt and privatizes the profits. But we'll get more into banks in a minute. So you can find that link within the actual Bitcoin blockchain. The longest part of the Bitcoin blockchain is the canonical block. When there are forks, now some of these forks sometimes take place in a software fashion. Now, this is where it gets even... Ooh, hello. Didn't want that. Okay. Okay, so, right, let's restart. There you can see all the research that I've been doing over the years. Right, thank you, Microsoft. So let's get back. So yes, when you are actually, when the decentralized computers, or kind of the miners, or the nodes as we also call them, have found the solution to the next block, there is a very slim possibility that two computers will find the exact same solution at the exact same time. Yes, it's very, very rare, but it can happen. And the rules within the blockchain basically state that you always work on the largest block, the longest block. And so what happens that if there were two like this, kind of like a fork like this, and two computers found the next block, the one that starts building the longest block wins, and the computer that found it maybe a nanosecond later or it's proven not to be the longest, they'll have to dump all their transactions, and the transactions will then get swept up in the next block that's actually built. So it does, eventually all transactions are sorted, but sometimes if there is congestion on the network, as we saw in January when Bitcoin hit $20,000, then it can slow down. And we do have issues within the industry of scaling. There's always going to be a problem, and the more people that understand this space and start to learn and use this space, we will have a lot of discussions about how best to scale this technology. But I keep on talking about the technology. Maybe let me give you a bit of a viewpoint as to what do I mean about why this is such a very cool technology. And it's really the combination of three separate technologies. So we've really kind of discussed the peer-to-peer networks, the distributed, decentralized network. It's a bit like Napster back in the day, or BitTorrent that we have at the moment. It's totally out there as a peer-to-peer network. But we also have cryptography. This cryptography is more or less the same as you would get for MasterCard, for Visa, for credit cards, how we do transactions with banks these days. So it's one-way cryptography, very difficult, frankly impossible to get back, and so therefore it's very powerful. And if anything, some people tend to say that quantum computers are going to come along and they're going to be able to overcome the cryptography. That's not strictly true. If quantum computers were that advanced enough to break it, they're advanced enough to actually give us maybe a different cryptographic algorithm to sign these transactions. And even if they were to break it, they will break kind of individual digital wallets rather than the whole blockchain. We would only be breaking the wallets that you're storing these coins in. Right, but the more interesting area is this game theory, crypto economics. This is the crux of what makes this a really interesting technology. Does anybody remember Russell Crowe in The Beautiful Mind? John Nash, with his economic incentives of how best to incentivize players in a network or players in a team. It's basically similar to that. If you actually have an incentive within the network, all of the actors within that decentralized network act on the best interests of the network. They are incentivized to do so, because if they do not, and if they look at injecting false transactions in, they are frozen out of the network. And it's not in their best interest, their best economic interest to do so. And so therefore, as long as you play the game of the right rules for the blockchain, you can participate and you can benefit.
Who freezes them out?
The rest of the nodes, so the rest of the miners. So once they check the transactions, if they were to actually find a transaction which doesn't actually abide by any of the rules, and there's a long set of rules, but they're pretty simple, then they will no longer trust that node, and they will no longer accept transactions from that node. So that node, by doing some kind of fraudulent activity in cheating the system, is now no longer part of the system. And that is done all automatically without any type of governance. But let's go further down the rabbit hole and layer over the top politics. And now we start to think maybe quite interesting concepts that might affect monetary policy, regulation, markets, national security, global banking, provably secure elections, and the democracy. If you think about third world countries, I'll leave that maybe to the next slide, because that's an interesting concept. But what we've got with this technology is the fact that it is not governed. There's no politics that can actually govern this technology. So therefore, countries can govern themselves out of Bitcoin, but you will not govern Bitcoin out of your country. There will always be a way around it. There will always be a way for people to use it. And if countries start by using politics to actually use it for their own purposes, then they're not going to be allowed to, because it's decentralized. They don't have any say in the matter. So that creates very interesting ideas, because when you think about America, who's 4.1 trillion in debt at the moment with the US dollar, well, we don't have a concept of debt in the crypto space. It's deflationary, as I mentioned. So we don't have any concept of debt. We don't need an economy built on debt. And what you'll see later on this presentation is that we haven't relied on debt to build out this infrastructure. What we've relied on is deflationary money and people actually investing in this space. We do not rely on kind of free printed money from central governments or central banks. And it could be very, very interesting where this market goes in the future as far as the politics are concerned. So, blockchain in a nutshell, really, is a persistent, transparent, public, append-only ledger. So let me just quickly break this down a little bit for you. Persistence is that it can't be shut down. It's always going to be there. It's the first ever digital currency which will have a permanent record. They're even talking that actually there is a company that is running a Bitcoin blockchain on a satellite at the moment. So if the internet was to go down, there would be one node up there on a satellite that is still processing transactions. Yeah, maybe not many, because the rest of the computers aren't talking to them, but there will be one node that will eventually have the longest Bitcoin blockchain, and it will continue to go even if we don't have the internet. It's transparent. Every single transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain, and I do keep on saying the Bitcoin blockchain, there are others, we'll go into that in a bit more detail. But every single transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain is open and public. Anybody can look at any transaction. And these transactions, of course, are cryptographically signed. You can't see people's details. It's pseudo-anonymous. So it's just a big transaction, what we call a transaction hash, which is just a load of random characters. But anybody can see that this wallet sent X amount of Bitcoin to this wallet. And the beauty of this system is that it knows where every single Bitcoin is at any moment in time, because every single node on the network has a copy of the blockchain. So when two wallets talk to each other, it knows exactly how much is in those two wallets, and it will only transfer that amount of money, and no more. So it'll only confirm what's in that wallet. So it's an append-only ledger. It can't be changed. It can't be taken away from. It's always out there. And you can add data to it and not change previous data by a mechanism of consensus through distributed parties that do not need to trust each other. So it doesn't matter who you are transacting with. You don't need to know. You don't need to trust them. You don't need to care about who they are, because at the end of the day, the blockchain is going to know how much Bitcoin is in their wallet and how much Bitcoin is in your wallet. Yeah.
The sort of the trust thing. Obviously, if there's one rogue node on a network, then there's a million others say no, you're wrong. What happens if you split the network in half or in thirds? Say some global government decided to shut down the transatlantic and trans-Pacific cables.
Yes.
For long enough that the Americas were isolated from Europe and Asia, for example.
So that is, if you can shut down more than 2/3 of the network,
yeah,
then you've got a problem.
Okay.
But the network will be able to run on 1/3.
Okay.
And this is why possibly the security of Bitcoin blockchain is so revered, is because it's so decentralized enough that that would never happen. It would always root around. So people who transact only need to trust the mechanism by which their consensus is arrived at. So when we talk about consensus, we talk about the rules behind the blockchain, what the Bitcoin blockchain actually uses to run. And that is the consensus algorithm. Now, there are different consensus algorithms. The one for Bitcoin is called proof of work. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a minute. But you're basically trusting the consensus algorithm, which is a provable mathematical formula. And basically, it's trusting the network. It's trusting the group think. It's trusting all the different nodes on the network. And we know from scientific studies that if you have a large enough group, which is decentralized enough, eventually they'll come to roughly the right answer. So it uses a little bit of that, but it actually uses the actual rules within the consensus algorithm to run all of those nodes. For Bitcoin, again, it relies on the computational challenge where only one party can solve the challenge at a time and add to the block. No one can force an entry onto the ledger that others disagree with. So this is, again, another important part of blockchain, is that if there's anything that tampers with the blockchain, you can see that the whole blockchain is made invalid for that one computer. All of the other computers are still going to process the transactions by the rules and are going to come to a consensus, but that one that maybe disagrees with everybody else will not take part. Yeah?
Sorry but we're setting what the challenge has got to be for the next thing you're going to do.
The challenge is the computers solving a provable mathematical challenge to build a block. And that was set up in the original white paper and it cannot be changed. And so therefore, everybody knows that rule. And everybody abides by that rule, because if they don't take part in the network.
Once one challenge has been solved, then there's another challenge.
Yes, correct. So
how is that next challenge getting?
It's again a mathematical formula that gets increasingly difficult the more computers you actually have on the network. It's kind of a brute force mechanism of just guessing what a cryptographic hash is, and that takes time. So yeah, once you get one block, then you then have a slightly more complicated computational problem to prove for the next block, and then the next block. But it is, yeah, although it's random, it is also provable that you will get computers that solve it and then add to the block. Does that help? It's a strange concept.
I'm in the same place. I mean, I can't quite. I mean, we're all computer scientists around here, obviously.
Yep.
It's a matter of getting your brain around why you can't solve the flipping thing that gets over and done with, I guess. So, in what way does the problem get set? Does it have more bits to it? So, is it a longer hash or something, or what? How does everybody know what the next problem is to be solved?
That is a good question, and I don't have an answer for you at the moment.
Yeah, something to do with the fashion or scope of the transaction.
Yeah. So depending on the transactions that you can grab for a block, that will kind of change the algorithm, the hash that you need to find. And the more transactions, the more difficult it gets, and the more blocks, the more difficult it gets. And there's a provable way of kind of how more difficult it gets, but still,
which is defined in the algorithm, whatever that.
Yeah. And so every single computer knows that once they solve it, the algorithm will get much more difficult, and they've got to solve a different algorithm, which is a bit more difficult. And then once that gets solved, then it'll be a bit more difficult.
And it sounds like it's simply a matter of coming up with a key which solves the public key at one time.
Correct. We'll go into a bit of private and public keys in a minute.
Excuse me, do we actually know the incentive of the originators of this? Why did they do it?
Why did they do it?
What did they get out of it?
Oh, we'll get into that in a bit more detail, because it's not necessarily altruistic. Well, it is more altruistic than it is economic.
But in a way, you're referring to them as they're rather godlike, whether it's one, two, or many.
Yep.
If we're actually all relying on this source, and obviously there's some sort of recursive iteration or whatever, but at the end of the day, do we actually trust them? Would they actually be, credible people that are creating such sources? You normally do have a backdoor involved, don't you?
I can see where you're coming from, but yeah, there's no backdoors built into the Bitcoin blockchain because it's open. It's open source. The code is there, the data is there. Anybody can have a look at it, and everybody can see how that code is run. So it's totally open, and you can actually kind of prove the method in which it's done, and it's basically kind of given for free. It has. Well, every single product is created by somebody.
Exactly.
And every single computer or every single mobile phone created by somebody. And you can say that for any type of product on the planet. Does it have a backdoor? Well, yeah, but this is more the fundamental kind of...
The operation's fine, but what I'm actually saying, you take one back step from the operation.
Yeah.
The operation is transparent. As in many companies that actually have transparent procedures, but there's actually things that are happening that could be happening even in companies that we don't really enforce.
No, true. So within a corporate environment, of course, you have intellectual property, and you have internal business processes that are your unique selling point, and so therefore you want to protect those.
So do we actually know why they did it then?
Yes. They did it for the better of humanity, and we'll go into some of those reasons.
What, so that we're controlled by computers?
The original people that set this all up wanted an economy that is reliant on maths rather than an economy that's reliant on banks.
So when I set it to 21 million, I know you can actually divide, but it's sort of...
Yeah, it's not too big, it's not too small, it's a nice number to use.
I think it's very small, really, compared as a global or universal type of transaction.
Correct. But it was, if you look at some of the memoirs of Satoshi Nakamoto and that group, then you'll he does go into a bit more detail about why it's 21 million. But it was a nice kind of area which is not too large for, you know, if you had billions and billions, I think humans tend to have a bit of a difficult understanding of that type of concept. When we start talking about billions, it's too big for us to understand.
Yes, but this is too big for us to understand because it's run by computers, and everybody in this room does not really appreciate how it works because it's actually being worked in a distributed network. It's on a recursive technique. None of us probably understand it.
No, and that's why I'm here.
No, but you're not supposed to understand it. I want you to answer his question.
There are elements of it that are difficult kind of concepts and areas, and as we go through this, you'll realise there's many levels. You know, I'm just giving you some of the highlights, and I'd need to kind of talk to my cryptographers to actually understand exactly the answer to that question.
Very briefly, how do the nodes find each other?
Again, that's more technical than kind of concept based. But it's kind of a random generation event where they would just reach out. They know the ports that these nodes transmit on, and they would just reach out to a random port on a network. They know what network they're accessing. And if they then use that node and that node is trustworthy, they check all the transactions, and if that node continues to be trustworthy, that will get that node kind of a better view within.
How is that traffic identified within the node versus the network as a whole? I mean, are you using just random ports and hoping for the best, or?
No, I think there are certain ports that you can specifically use for blockchains.
My point is that the traffic on the network is identifiably
yes.
blockchain transactions.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry for a couple of steps.
Yeah.
I don't understand it, but I'll accept that the problem is set however it's set. The next problem is then set. The miners do whatever they do to try and crack that problem. If we stick with the mining analogy, digging coal out of the ground, for example, that coal has a value you can sell. You can burn it for fuel or whatever. Where is the value in solving this sort of arbitrarily set problem? Who does it help? Where is the value then created that justifies being given Bitcoin in the world?
Okay, so for that, maybe we let me talk about my next slide, and I'll cover that, because I want to start talking about how we normally kind of transact with each other. And why this is quite an important technology. You know, back in the old days, it was a barter system, obviously, you know, chickens and goats and, you know, maybe some precious stones. And over time, you needed to create a ledger of what is owed to who and who has what. And this ledger had to be a kind of a centralized ledger where you would go to a specific place to record what you have, what you bartered, and what you've used. And over time, kind of, you know, banks have sprung up to actually manage that ledger and manage the kind of, I guess, the centralized nature of the transactions that are flowing through their systems. What you're starting to find with this is, because it's a decentralized, open, public ledger that can never be shut down, it's an automatic transaction system that nobody can touch, nobody can corrupt, and nobody can put false information into. So we've now got this technology where if we kind of apply those three areas, like peer-to-peer, cryptography, and economic incentives, we can actually record transactions for free for everybody. And it gets even further than that. But you know, let's just kind of concentrate on that a little bit. You know, when we're transacting with each other face to face, it's very easy for me to see that you've got a bit of money and I've got a bit of money, or, you know, I need that bit of money and I see you face to face, we transact, everything is fine. But when you're transacting across geographical boundaries, you know, are you going to trust that person you're transacting with? What we have these days is we trust banks. And we give banks our personal details, and we let them take our money, and they might kind of fractional reserve lend that money on the open markets and make more money for themselves, and they might give us a very small amount back in as far as interest rates. And when we want to transfer, or we want to deposit, or we want to withdraw, they charge us for it. But over the years, the trust in the banking system is starting to wane. And we've had the financial crisis of 2007, 2008. We've had PPI insurance. We've had libel rigging rates. We've had banks that prop up corrupt regimes. We've had TSB that goes down and it continues to have issues. We have Visa, which is a centralised service that went down for a day and really pissed everyone off because they couldn't buy beer for the football. Having a centralised banking process actually has one attack vector, and everybody tries to attack that. That's why you had robber barons back in the day trying to break into banks and to break into vaults. That's why you have hackers that are trying to hack various different banks at the moment. And they have all of our details. They have everything about us. They know absolutely everything about us and everything about our transactions. And they're spilling this information everywhere. The banking infrastructure is working on a lot of legacy equipment. But maybe let me take this in a little bit of a step to the side. I'm a billionaire. I just like to kind of prove that to you. I have a 50 billion Zimbabwean note. I am a Zimbabwean billionaire. When I picked this up, it was worth 3 cents. No, 3 pence, $3. And now it's worth 3 cents. Yeah, 50 billion, 3 cents. The inflation rate in Zimbabwe was in the thousands. The inflation rate in Venezuela is in its thousands. Cyprus is having an issue. The Italian banks are having an issue. Greece is having an issue. Everybody seems to be having an issue in this world where we just let the central banks print money and nobody gives a shit about the debt. Yeah? And you ask the Zimbabweans or the Venezuelans to buy Bitcoin, they will jump at the chance because it's less volatile than their geographical money. And then you realise that if they were to buy Bitcoin when it was $20,000 in January, they would have more money now than if they bought bolivars. And Bitcoin is now at $6,000. In fact, it's gone up in the last couple of days, so it's about 6,500, I think, now. So you're questioning, why do we need to trust the old system and why do we need to do that? Well, this is the answer. It's getting corrupt regimes, getting corrupt dictatorships, and getting third world countries actually on a system that they can trust. Or let's take it, they don't have to trust because the system trusts itself.
There's the problem of market manipulation that came about that boosted Bitcoin to the point where it was going to take a nosedive. So you can't separate away the propping up of corrupt regimes versus trust of a conceptual currency.
We'll discuss it in a bit more detail about the fact it's taken a nosedive, definitely. But
there is evidence of pump and dump.
Yeah, there is. It's an unregulated market, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well.
So you've just put into place the trust of Bitcoin. You should trust it because it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that, it doesn't do the other. You can't trust it any more than a bank if it can be pumped and dumped.
Well, don't forget we had the run on Northern Rock.
We've had a run on Bitcoin. It's exactly the same thing.
Bitcoin survived. Bitcoin has been around for since 2009. But yes, it is a volatile market. Yes, it does have a few pump and dump schemes, but over the general course, once you have more liquidity in the system, that will kind of calm itself down. And yes, there will be regulations eventually that will actually resolve that. We're all kind of really looking forward to regulation because it legitimizes this industry. and will welcome any type of regulation. But when you, I mean, we're very lucky in this first world country of ours because we can rely on our banking infrastructure. Our money is decentralized enough around the world that it doesn't fluctuate a lot. Once Bitcoin actually gets a lot of users and a lot of people using it, it will become less volatile, it will be less susceptible to pump and dump schemes, and those pump and dump schemes will get regulated because at the end of the day, it will affect people's pockets. But at the moment, this is a very immature industry and it's growing. And there's reasons why it's growing, and we'll kind of get into that in a bit more detail. Yeah?
Just from a purely conceptual standpoint, if it poses as much of a threat to the vested interests of people who've currently got a lot of very real money
And power.
and power, and who have a vested interest in it not working and have a lot of real money.
Or letting it work and then come in, which is
Yeah.
How does it? Where's the sort of the plan between either it's allowed to exist because it benefits the people who apparently bypass it here, or it's not allowed to exist because they've got a lot of very real money.
They could try to shut it down, but they won't be able to. It's open source, anybody could use it.
Yeah, they've got like billions of real money. I don't quite.
Yeah, well, fine.
They can like start wars.
Yes.
I don't see how that sort of. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, but that's
Maybe
with
there is no defence against people with that much money
Yeah.
in any circumstance.
Yeah,
Whether a real bank or
genuinely, if it's that disruptive,
Yeah.
it's sort of got a target painted on its forehead.
Oh, very much so. It's had a target painted on its forehead for the last 9 years. And that's why banks don't like this. Banks are worried. Banks are very worried because this upends their whole legacy systems. When you have so much money put into the banking infrastructure and the printing of money and the wasteful resources that go into just printing money, let alone transporting it, let alone securing it in vaults and building large buildings to secure this money and then link it to things like gold. Well, you know, our money these days isn't even linked to gold. It's just a promise note from a government, you know, and are we going to have, you know, $10 promised by the US government who's 4.1 trillion in debt? You know, what, yes, they can throw billions at stopping this, but it won't be
the US
stopped.
government also has the world's largest armed forces.
Yeah.
And nuclear weapons.
Yes.
And,
Yeah. Well, it's not just yeah.
I mean, I just wondered what the plan was.
So in that context, that they could take on any currency. But this is digital.
Except possibly the renminbi, but yeah.
But this is digital.
But aren't the banks also adopting blockchain technology? Because blockchain, you know, distributed databases and things like that, you know, obviously, yes, I can see, you know, a lot more users with that.
Yeah.
But if it is so, you know, we all need to be very frightened in this room of Bitcoin, not actually welcome it if it's actually going to bring down all of the financial systems globally. And if we did have regulations, which you said you'd welcome, who's going to be in charge of these regulations?
Yes.
Moto or whatever his name is.
Yes. So there needs to be some kind of global regulation on it. But you know, why are we so distrusting of a technology that actually democratizes money throughout the world, and does it?
It's not being entirely democratic. To be a democracy, you require the rule of law. And if you don't know who actually owns the bitcoins, and therefore when you divorce your wife or your wife divorces you, you want half of everything, and you can't find out what half is or even get it, then it's not complying with our democratic legal system.
That's a good point, but you could also say that our democratic legal system has actually created, you know, powerhouses in the banks, and they all tend to be a little bit corrupt, and we've seen that with so many issues around money in our current antiquated legal systems. You know, when we are talking about this technology, we're not just talking about how useful it will be for us. Yes, we are very, very lucky. We live in a first world country with a very stable currency, and we have a great rule of law. But how about those people in third world countries that do not even have a bank account?
Well, I doubt that they can actually invest in Bitcoin at the moment.
All they need is a smartphone.
There isn't Bitcoin yet, but you do need to actually invest something in it, or is it just, there's something there? And this is a system that's still driven by greed, isn't it? People that invested here, I'm sure they're not invested to give their money away. They're actually investing with the hope that they're going to make money.
There are some speculators in the industry, definitely, and there always will be. But there's some speculators as far as stocks and shares are concerned.
Do you invest in this to make money or not?
No, I'm giving this talk for free. I'm giving this talk. No. I am working with clients to actually make a very big change in our IT industry, because this technology is not just a form of actually sending secure transactions where you don't have to trust anybody and you don't need a bank. So we go from this to that. We put blockchain in its place. We don't need banks. When you are transferring money from one geographical region to another, and it is a global digital currency, you don't need banks. You don't need escrow services. You do not need foreign exchanges. There is a cryptocurrency called Litecoin, which again was a bit of a fork of Bitcoin, but with different rules, who transferred $90 million in under 30 seconds for 40p. And when you have businesses and people around the world who want to transfer that amount of money, maybe it's to their parents in another country. Yeah. But maybe it's just between kind of large corporations. But they can now do it at a far cheaper rate, far quicker, far more efficiently, and they can have a permanent record transaction of it.
If Lloyds Bank want to, or if you want to transfer money from the UK to France, Lloyds Bank will charge you £9.50.
Exactly.
Even if you're only transferring 20 quid.
Yeah, exactly. So and it will take more than a day. And what banks do at the moment is they route it through the SWIFT payment system, and they have no idea which route it will take. In which case, they have no idea how much that is going to actually cost the original user. And so therefore they charge usually the maximum amount it would be to transfer it from one place to the other. They have no idea what it would actually cost them. This you do.
So Anthony, how is this going to actually solve our problems of third world problems, which are normally driven by greed, because we have enough food on this planet to feed everyone if we wanted to. We don't have to have starving people as it is now. How is this actually going to sort of give us this sort of way forward?
Stay awake and I'll show you.
Just to think, if it's deflationary, how do we lend people money to buy weapons from us at extortionate interest rates? If you can't print your own money and then lend to them and then demand that they pay it back, how do we sell them weapons?
Do we want to sell them weapons?
Yeah, the third world. We lend the money, we make inventory money, we lend it to them, they pay it back to British arms industry, and then we charge them massive amounts of interest on it.
Well, I'm quite happy for that to be in the traditional finance sector.
Yeah, I mean, but how's, this is terrible.
This is terrible for the arms industry.
Yeah,
Really?
we're not going to be able to sell them guns and shoot
Well, yeah, possibly, but you could take any money and you could sell arms to any country. So just be
imaginary money and then charge them massive amounts of interest on it. There was never any money to begin with.
There's not really the concept of interest. There's a concept of dividends, but not really interest in this world.
Yeah, but that's the point. You give it as overseas aid, and then it comes back to the UK in the next 10 minutes, along with a bunch of kickbacks, and then that's why we send it out.
I would say that there's probably a better way of doing business.
I mean, because they've got they owe it to somebody, and that's us, because we lent it to them in the first place.
Okay.
That's why they've got no money, because we lent it to them to buy weapons from us.
Maybe we should stop doing that. Okay. So we talked a little bit about cryptography. This is basically a way that you can ensure in a digital environment that one person definitely gets the money. You have a private key, so Alice wants to send $10 to Bob. She has a private key. A private key is a little bit like the password to your bank account. A public key, the best way I can explain that is your account and sort code. And so therefore, you'll quite happily share your account and sort code, but the only way of actually ensuring that you get that £10 is for that public key and that private key to work together to unlock those funds. So it's the kind of cryptography that we all have in our current industry at the moment for Visa, MasterCard. How do we stop double spending? So we have a digital currency, and of course there are going to be some very, very cool computer hackers out there and who are going to try and spend the same amount of money at exactly the same time. But that's where the shared ledger or the shared truth comes in. The fact that every single computer or node on this decentralized network knows how much is in the system at any given moment in time, because there's a shared truth, you only have confirmation for one of those transactions, not both. And so this is a way that we can actually stop double spending, which kind of currently happens in the real world. Let's talk a little bit about the consensus algorithms. So POW is proof of work. We mentioned this for Bitcoin. So Bitcoin uses proof of work. Proof of work is basically the computers all expending energy, their computer power, to build the blockchain. So when this was first devised, Satoshi Nakamoto said, right, what is there one commodity of all around the world that anybody can access, or most people can access, that is basically the same, that can basically be used in the same way to secure an open public ledger, which is energy. And so these machines are all burning a lot of energy to actually solve the algorithm, to build the blockchain, and to store the blockchain. Yes, it does create a lot of energy. There is a lot of energy that goes into securing the Bitcoin blockchain, about the same size as the whole country of Denmark. But it gives us an open public ledger, and there are a lot of companies currently looking of ways in which we can environmentally more efficiently utilize that power. So there's a lot of people currently moving to places like Iceland, where it's cold, and so therefore they don't need the air conditioning units. There's cheap electricity because it's geothermal power, and there are quite good regulations. And so over time, we will see that the efficiency of the Bitcoin blockchain is improved. I mean, let's face it all here. We know there is an energy problem. We know that maybe within our lifetime, we need to solve the energy problem. And we need to solve it with solar, we need to solve it with wind, we need to solve it with wave, and possibly nuclear fission. So we know that we have energy requirements on this earth, and we know that we need to actually get more efficient at it. Yes, Bitcoin blockchain uses a lot of energy, but gradually over time, that will improve. But for an open public ledger that's accessible to anybody around the world, some people think it's a small price to pay, and if you were to actually take all the energy that the banking infrastructure uses, you'll find it is 10 times higher.
What about if there's multiple types of Bitcoin, and they're all running their own ledgers, or just not multiplying all that energy?
Yes, possibly, but in this industry, there's only kind of a handful, maybe 10 different blockchains that have stood the test of time. To actually build a blockchain, you need energy, and you need it to be out there for...
If there's a revolution, everyone moves to it.
Yep.
It's catastrophic energy.
Possibly, yes, and that's something that we've got to understand, and we've got to ensure that that doesn't happen, or there are efficient processes to do that. One of those is POS, which is proof of stake. So proof of stake means that you take a certain amount of coins on the blockchain and you stake them, in which case you hand them over to help with the transactions on the system. But you get a dividend for actually handing that over. So that's the interest. And you stake that, so therefore you have a skin in the game. You've got something there that you're going to kind of utilize, but it's going to be for the benefit of the network. Because you're not going, once you stake a whole load of coins, you're not going to then kind of muck over the blockchain.
When you reach 21 million target, will there be no more mining?
No, the miners will kind of change into just a glorified transaction hoarders, and they will get a percentage of all the transactions.
And that gives the enemy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it certainly will. So we are moving to a proof of stake environment. It's going to take a number of years. It's got to be figured out, and in this decentralized economy, how we actually do that. Ethereum is the second largest cryptocurrency. It is its own blockchain. It is highly decentralized, and it is being used today in business. And that is the first one that we think will have proof of stake architecture around it. Currently, it's proof of work. So you still have to mine Ethereum like you have to mine Bitcoin. But Ethereum is very interesting because Ethereum takes Bitcoin but moves it on a little bit. So now we're talking about a slightly different blockchain. And we're talking about the Ethereum blockchain. And it's used for apps. It's used for smart contracts and applications. It has a layer on it, which means you can run apps on it and write back code back to the original blockchain. By smart contracts, I mean contracts that are coded. But when we start to look about how we code contracts, you start to realize that you can do it in minutes rather than hours or days. It can be automatic instead of manual. You don't need escrow. It's a fraction of the cost, and you don't even have to sign it with yourself there. You can have a digital presence. We all have assets. The most important assets that we have, like cars and houses, is all paper-based. And if we want to transfer that from one person to another, it takes days. And it takes a lot of legalese, and it takes a lot of effort by many different people in many different organizations to ensure that you can actually easily pass on your property to somebody else. But if you were to encode property into a smart contract, and when the survey is done, the smart contract is updated. When there is a new RPI figure that comes out from the government, the smart contract's updated. It knows a running version of what that property is, where it's based, and it makes it very, very easy to transfer to somebody else.
I can understand that being, very, very useful. My problem is the origination point of where the information first comes into the system. Because, as you know, once it's on, everyone then validates it. It could be, validating a load of rubbish.
Yes.
So how does they actually sort that out? Because, for instance, if you had someone that said you no longer own that,
Correct.
and everyone else
Correct.
then actually says you do know.
Again, you need a central authority to ensure that that actually happens, like we have today. Like we have mortgage brokers and we have banks that confirm that the property is what it's said it is. We use the same old infrastructure, but this time we use the techies and the nerds to encode that into a smart contract. And once it's in a smart contract, then we can do some clever stuff with it.
And how is that smart contract then signed off? That's my thing, because I don't really trust the nerds, to be quite honest with you, especially those that are in the revenue. So, they do make mistakes, we all make mistakes.
Yes.
The point of entry,
Yeah, and there will be mistakes made in smart contracts, and there will be big problems with smart contracts. We don't have the legal framework to manage smart contracts at the moment, but we do have the basics of how we can encode in various information in smart contracts. So yes, we're going to have to figure that all out, and we're going to have to build an ecosystem around that. But once you have smart contracts, the way I explain it to some people is we have wet code and we have dry code. Dry code is ones and zeros, stuff that you don't need any kind of human intervention. Wet code is the stuff that us humans have to get involved with. It's a grey area. It's an area that needs a human judgment. And that is this area, where you need to actually have an authority that actually encodes the original property on the blockchain. But this has already been done. There are companies out there that actually are doing this currently for property. And when we had the tsunami in Japan, and it wiped out a whole village, all of the authorities came up to that village and they were looking around and they were saying, right, well, there used to be a house here. Who owns this? Who owns this plot of land? And 5 hands went up. So, because all the records were just wiped out, nobody knew who owned what. Nobody could prove they owned what, because all the paper records were gone. And so therefore, there was an immense problem. But if you actually encode it digitally and store it digitally, then you have something that you can rely on. And sometimes it's actually better than what we have. Now, in this country where we're a nation of house buyers, well, yes, maybe, you know, our systems are maybe a little bit more mature than those in other countries. And perhaps we don't need as much infrastructure, or we can rely on the current infrastructure we've got. But still, when we're talking about transferring property, days.
But what does it matter? To me,
Yeah.
whether my property transfers in a week, or a month, or a day.
If it doesn't, don't worry, you don't have to use it.
No. But you are trying to sell me a system whereby transactions are sped up. That's your job, that's your whole company's job.
Well, I don't sell these systems.
I fail to see the benefit to Joe Bloggs, who sits here and might sell his house next year, or any other amount of property.
It's a fraction of the cost. No stamp duty.
There might not be stamp duty, but I'm damn sure somebody in the middle will still take that.
Well, okay. So
I don't think there'll be that much of a financial change in what it would cost to sell my house in my lifetime.
Keep those thoughts in your head, and we'll discuss at the break. But as I go through the next few slides, some of the stuff I'm going to say might kind of make you think differently about the situation.
I can see the benefit to large corporations.
Yeah.
Because time literally is money.
Yeah.
You know, you can shave 1 millisecond off the transmission time between New York and London.
Yeah.
You can make an awful lot.
Exactly. But
that's not me.
Yeah. But let's have a look at maybe some other solutions.
Yeah.
Digital value exchange. But we discussed this. The simple stuff. A family member sends some Bitcoin to another family member. We can do that now. Smart, right, and obligation. So a consumer buys a digital content stream. So once you actually encode these smart contracts, and you maybe have a artist who wants to sell their music, they can encode it, they can put it on a blockchain, and they can open up a payment channel to any other person who wants to take part in that blockchain. As long as that payment channel stays open, there are companies that are doing this, they have access to that artist's back catalogue. But it also means that that artist is being paid directly from the people that consume that media. So therefore, there's no Ticketmaster in the middle, there's no EMI in the middle. They produce their own content, they sell it to customers, and you're taking out the middle person, just like we took out the banks. This is all technology where we take out intermediaries because we don't need to trust them. We don't need Uber. In fact, let's go into some more of these details. So, maybe a basic smart contract. So a landlord remotely locks non-paying tenants out of an apartment. All on the blockchain, all automatic, no need for human intervention. Let's go a little bit more complex. Multi-party smart contract. A seller lends buyers funds to buy a house. But because you've now got a house encoded on the blockchain, you can split up that house or that building or that corporate building into thousands of pieces, and you can crowdfund that building. Because everybody can have a small percentage of that building easily and with low transactions. Yeah, but
trying to nail one landlord down to get something repaired is bad enough.
And we're going to have to figure that out. How about distributed autonomous business units? So a unit of corporation issues its own bonds, and buyers monitor payments via a shared ledger. Now this is starting to become powerful because there are those ledgers out there already, but they're highly centralized and they don't allow everybody to participate. Now we're talking about a democratization of money and the fact that everybody can take part. What the internet did for communications, blockchain is starting to do for transactions and money.
Anthony, are you a Star Trek or a Matrix fan?
Both.
Because obviously what you're saying is, the actual technology is very revolutionary.
Yeah.
Obviously, though, I'd like to see what Remote or whatever his name is, if he likes humans, in fact, because obviously I can see not a requirement for many of us in the future, And with all of this, there's no need for it, is there?
Well, a lot of people do say that robotics might be the downfall of the manufacturing industry, but as we look into this in a bit more detail, we actually think anybody in a transactional role is going to be affected by blockchain, and I guarantee that.
It's not just the transactional roles, is it?
No.
This
Well,
is people. If you have a look at all the jobs associated with all of that, where are they absorbed?
hold your hopes.
Having that argument versus the industrial revolution.
Yeah.
Why are people having to work? There are other
When there was a horse and cart, everybody was trying to. There was so much around that people were trying to figure out how best to clean up their horse.
The population of the world is so much smaller there.
Yeah.
We've got some catastrophes actually
Yeah,
happening in the sense
but
of
everybody-
population,
yeah.
climate control, and AI. It's sort of, don't get me wrong, I think blockchain as a technology, distributed, whatever, I totally agree with Bitcoin. I'm still waiting for the why.
Bitcoin is the purest and the most secure of them. And this is what a lot of companies are relying on at the moment because it's been out there for the longest. And what you're going to find in the blockchain space is the one that's been out the longest in a public setting.
Did you actually say when these people, because obviously I've got two investors in front of me, invested, I don't know what, do they invest money? What are they investing in?
Yeah.
Space, you said. What is it that they actually are doing?
Yeah, we'll go into it. So how about distributed autonomous organisations? So a self-driving truck makes peer-to-peer deliveries, pays local toll fees, and buys local electricity. All without human intervention. Distributed autonomous governments. Settlers of a previous uninhabited area code their own self-enforcing government services, which can't be shut down. And then we get to the really complex, obviously, distributed autonomous societies. A group of settlers from different areas establish a self-enforcing trade agreements, all encoded, all on the blockchain. So really, the blockchain is affecting a lot of industries at the moment, and already it's affecting the future of transactions. We've got e-commerce, global payments, remittances, they're all under the digital currency banner. We've got record keeping with healthcare. Healthcare is an interesting one. There is a company in America called Hashed Health, and they have encoded a doctor's credentials and education into a smart contract. So that when he locums at another hospital, they have to check it, and it takes minutes as opposed to days to actually go through the paperwork. This is where the blockchain is actually saving lives. Because everything becomes quicker. Everything becomes easy to transfer in a digital space. We are moving to a digital economy, a decentralized digital economy. But you've got other things like voting. Put voting on the blockchain and you can know in real time exactly what the results are and ensure that you don't get any manipulation. Intellectual property, ownership, we've talked about crowdfunding, we've talked about breaking up maybe a building into 1,000 pieces for crowdfunding, private markets and equity. How about shares? Shares are just basically digital parts of an organisation that you invest in. So if it can be proven and you can actually find the authenticity of a shareholder, why wouldn't you want to actually have that on the blockchain where you can actually prove everybody's there and you can prove they've all had a vote in the AGM? Escrow, wages and digital rights.
Again, you need to have some means for the law.
Yes, I totally agree, but with every single technology revolution that's ever been, the law is always behind it. It will always be that way.
But the sensible builders, sensible IT people, sensible designers would build the hand into the law, into the basics, so that
the law,
there has to be a decision where, okay, the blockchain's doing something, but the High Court somewhere says actually no, and you have to be able to do.
Yes, and we will have to figure that one out because at the moment that does not happen. But when this is a little bit like when we had the internet and we first saw TCP/IP protocols, and nobody knew what the TCP/IP protocol was really for, and it would bloom into Google and Amazon and eBay. We had no idea, but it was a basic protocol layer of how we actually send digital data over networks, and there was no law. It was, we didn't know how to use it or what kind of legal structures would be a part of it. But you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater just because there's no legal structure around
You
it.
learn from what you've done, and you don't make the same mistake twice.
Well, this is a whole different world. We're making mistakes all the time because we've never been here before. There are many mistakes being made, but this is a technology that will kind of mature over time.
Is there meant to be an hour in wages?
Is there meant to be what?
An hour. Not that.
No, close. Well, it could be wagers rather than wages. So yeah, but it could be both. But yeah, well, that could be a bit of a typo. But
He's taking bets on here.
Mistakes are being made all the time.
For logos of Backdoors, so it was wages as equivalent.
okay, so we have many people looking at this space at the moment. There are people like Google, Enterprise. Google is using it. Alphabet's using it. It's used as a digital currency, advertising for a government in Estonia. Insurance are using this in smart contract form. You can imagine how this is going to upend the insurance industry. There are a lot of people using this. Yes, we've had some regulation in some countries, but it's not formalized globally yet. And there will be more regulation to come. It's going to be patchwork, but the thing is we're going to have a global consensus around this, because you can't have one country that governs it out and the other next door country governs it in. Because
what is the regulatory development regarding blockchain or
blockchain, ICOs, which we'll get into, just how you actually use the technology and how you protect customers and clients against scams. And
you're saying like Bitcoin's only there to prove how secure this blockchain is, really?
Say again?
Bitcoin's only here because it's secure, and it's here just to prove how secure this technology is.
Yes, Bitcoin is the most secure blockchain out there, and it is highly secure.
But in a way, it's just there to prove that this technology works.
Yes, and when Satoshi Nakamoto kind of came up with the concept and released it out there, a few people cottoned on, the really early people, as to what this technology can do. But now we're starting to find corporates are really interested in this technology.
I can because obviously distributed databases and that, obviously that sort of idea has been around for years.
Yeah.
And obviously this is a practical implementation of it.
Yes.
But then it actually gets on top of this Bitcoin thing, and I think a lot of people get really sort of pushed along with all of that.
Yes, they do, but they've got to understand the underlying concepts. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a little bit of a break, but I just wanted to say welcome to the internet of blockchains.
Internet of Things, yeah.
Yeah.
Google, biggest AI.
We do think that this will become a bit of a protocol layer. There are businesses currently that have a normal business processes in their corporations, and they're running kind of maybe private blockchains. So you can fork a blockchain and you can run it privately, a bit like an intranet. You don't need cryptocurrency because you don't need the economic incentives, because you trust your internal network. But it's still a security risk, because you're still running on an internal network and it's a central point of security. But there are many companies out there that are doing their own business processes, and when they get to a milestone, they're writing back to the Bitcoin or Ethereum blockchain. So it's a bit like the TCP/IP layer, whereby we're writing back to a provable, secure, decentralized network, but we'll run all our normal business processes.
Independent to this, Anthony, what do you actually think? There's obviously AI experts out saying that the next 40 years will be the most challenging 40 years for humanity, whether it exists or not.
Yeah, AI is a core part of this. Another part of my business looks at a fluid enterprise, and underneath the fluid enterprise you've got the triumvirate of IoT sensors feeding data into a central data store, AI acting on that data, and that the important stuff that needs to be shared public with multiple parties around. is put on the blockchain. And I'll leave you with this. I'll leave you with this one comment before we go into the break, and we'll come back and talk about the bad side of some of these areas and the scams and stuff like that. So we won't just, I know I've been passionate about it, but we'll talk about the bad side of it. But just take this one thing away. There's a company called Overstock in the US. They're a bit like an Amazon store, but for the US market, you can buy anything on it. They currently do 1.2% of all their revenue with crypto. But that department that deals with crypto does not need a disaster recovery department, because this is all decentralized. It's all, if one node goes down, another will just take the payment. They don't need to pay Visa and MasterCard for payments. They don't need, I said a fraud department, did I? A fraud department. They don't need a large accounting department. So they don't need a fraud department, disaster recovery department, or a large accounting department, because it's very easy to track this through a public ledger. It's easier than actually accepting cash. And we'll leave it at that. I hope that kind of opened your eyes a little bit to what this technology is capable of. Yes, we don't have all the frameworks in place yet, and yes, we need a lot more legal ramifications around all this. But let's talk about some of the other areas, some of the maybe not so good areas. The first thing I want to touch on is mining, because with blockchains, especially the Bitcoin blockchain and the Ethereum blockchain, because it's proof of work, you need computational power, what we call hashes, in the form of graphics cards and CPUs. We can mine these coins. And by mining, we grab all those transactions together, try and find a block, and we secure the network with our own computational power and our own energy. So we can start off really simply. I have a Windows machine at home, which is running a bit of software called NiceHash. NiceHash mines some of the smaller proof of work coins, these smaller blockchains. So there's not just Bitcoin, there's not just Ethereum, there are a number of other smaller blockchains. Now, they aren't as secure because they haven't been out there as long, but you can actually mine that blockchain. And what NiceHash does is it mines those smaller coins, uses that money, and gives me Bitcoin. But the beauty of it is that I've got solar panels. So I'm actually mining for free with my Windows machine. It's only got one graphics unit on it, so it's not a lot, but it's free. And again, the taxman does not know how to tax it. But, I created this out of sunlight, HMRC. Is it part of my capital gains? Oh, yes, it is. Okay, so then I'm taxed on my capital gains. So the way of taxing in the UK at the moment is anything to do with any above the capital gains limit that you normally have with tax. In America, it's slightly different. In America, they are taxed on every single transaction. So any transaction you make, and some companies in America are making thousands and millions of these transactions. And every single one of them, they're taxed on. And you think, really, our financial system is in a good state when we have to notify the taxman of every single transaction, and at the price that it was at, minus the volatility, obviously, because of course it's gone up and down since then, but exactly what we bought it for at that precise moment in time, and the actual price that we may have paid extra to get it into the next block or not. I mean, it's just an absolute mind.
The HMRC will also have blockchain, so they'll know everything anyway, they'll be automatic.
Exactly, at the end, eventually, yes, they will. Eventually, I think that's the way we go. So you can mine it like with a Windows machine, or you can build something like this, which is a rig. It's a little small Ethereum rig. I built this with a friend of mine. It mines Ethereum, and yes, it takes a fair bit of energy, and it heats the room up nicely. Especially in the summer. Not exactly great to run it in the summer, but then we've been in a bear market for the last 6 months, so it's not, some people are finding that mining isn't as lucrative as it was when we were at 20,000 Bitcoin. and at that time I think Ethereum was at 1,400 per Ethereum coin, and now Ethereum is about $450. But the way to get the best mining rig is to have the cheapest motherboard you can, the cheapest CPU you can, which is a large CPU, power unit, cheap but quite powerful, about kind of 1,000 watts. And a small little hard drive, and you can actually build it with 5 graphics cards for about £3,000, and that will get you kind of about 2.4 Ethereum a week.
What's the ROI on that then?
Actually, no, that's probably less now. It used to be 2. Yeah. The ROI is about 6 to 9 months. Actually, now in the bear market, I think that's been pushed out more to about a year, so you can recoup that. But it's not just the capital cost of the graphics cards. Of course, you've got to take into account the electricity, and that's what really makes it difficult to have a return on investment under about 9 months. But then, once you have that return on investment, you've still got 5 graphic cards that you can sell. The problem is that actually sourcing the graphics card is a bit more difficult, because everybody wants to do it at the moment, because it's quite lucrative. And so gamers are getting really, really pissed off because there's not enough graphics card out there, and the graphics card they wanted for £450 is now £750. But that's just market forces for you. You can then go one step further. I know a few people in the industry who entertain large companies building out server farms in countries like Iceland, and they won't entertain anything under £100 million for a server farm, and that's to mine Bitcoin directly. You know, all of this ebbs and flows, so if the price drops, miners tend to say, well, can't afford it, it's not worth my money, so therefore the hash rate drops of the whole of the Bitcoin blockchain, and therefore it becomes lucrative for the people that stay in. So it's kind of a very self-balancing market forces that you've got there. Okay, there are some key players in this industry. We discussed Satoshi Nakamoto, who nobody knows who he is. However,
he's a computer, by the way.
It could be because he's a computer, but he's the one that came up with the algorithms and the 3 technologies and put them together. Now, something very interesting has happened in the last month in this space, is that Satoshi Nakamoto may have reared his head again and is writing. He's writing a book, and everyone thinks that it's a scam, and that this guy is just well versed in the blockchain space. But some of what he's saying is very true to how the whole business got set up in the first place. So there is a slim possibility that he is still out there and he is still a part of this industry. But the easiest thing that he could do to prove himself is, of course, sign a transaction from the Genesis block. He's the one that created it. He's got the private key for the Genesis block. Or does he? Did he destroy it? I think it's probably destroyed. Or it's died with him. We don't know.
Anthony, is that backdoor thing I'm referring to?
No, because even if you have a private key, that's only to one wallet. That's not to the blockchain.
It's to the Genesis one, isn't it?
You might be able to do some, pretty more nefarious things if you had the private key to the Genesis block. Yeah, possibly. So yes, that could be a bone of contention in the future, but we don't think that. If you were to,
obviously the name looks Japanese. Is it Japanese?
No.
What is it?
There is Nakamoto was quite a common name, and so it was to throw people off the scent as to where he was situated. The best guesses are that he was a US professor who understood cryptography and was big in the cryptographic space, and brought in lots of people in the cryptographic environment to build this, but also worked a little bit in the UK, or kind of understood UK politics. Going back to your point though, what would be the economic incentive of bringing down the Bitcoin blockchain? It would
use all the money to pay for the third world deficit.
Yeah, but the thing is, as soon as it's hacked, and as soon as it's shown to be, it's not worth anything. So therefore, as soon as you do any kind of nefarious activity like that, Bitcoin will just plummet, and so therefore it won't be useful. That's where the economic, the kind of the tokenomics come into this, which is kind of the economic theory around it. Is the fact that if you had some nefarious actors wanting to take it down, after they took it down, it would be worth nothing to them. So therefore, they spend a shitload of money for not much reason. Yeah, but you would never be able to spend that many Bitcoin in the current exchanges around quick enough. The markets are they fluctuate wildly, as some of you may know. The volatility is wild, so it will easily drop very quickly.
Is there a market maker then? There's no market maker then. How?
No.
So who's deciding the price? Why is it so volatile?
Supply and demand. Well, there is market manipulators because there's no regulation. So there are people with bots. There are people who have large access to a lot of Bitcoin and are just dumping loads. Price goes down, they buy loads. So yes, there is that. Okay, so let's run through a few of these. Mark Andreessen, he's one of the first guy that started to get Bitcoin, and it went up in price, so he decided to finance other companies and kind of in a bit of an IPO setting, kind of build other companies up. Don and Alex Tapscott are son and father, and have written a couple of books around the economics around Bitcoin and kind of what areas it's going to revolutionize. Elizabeth Stark came up with Lightning Labs. Lightning is an addition to the Bitcoin blockchain to make it easier to use. And it's like a layer 2 protocol layer over the top of the original Bitcoin blockchain that allows you to bundle transactions together. So if you had, like, say, a subscription model and you were bundling a lot of subscription fees from a lot of different people, you can then bundle it into one payment and then send that to the Bitcoin blockchain rather than thousands of little payments. So it basically speeds up the network. Gavin Andreessen took over the Bitcoin blockchain when Satoshi Nakamoto handed over the keys, and kind of ran it for a number of years successfully, building out the security part of Bitcoin. Andreas Antonopoulos, he is one of my favourite guys in the crypto space. He's very intelligent. He's been here since the year dot, since since the beginning of Bitcoin. He preaches kind of the humanitarian aspects of it and the democratization of this technology. If you were to see any kind of YouTube video with him in, take note of what he says. I think he's very trustworthy, and just watch some of his videos. He's very engaging and very interesting to understand where this technology is going. In antithesis to that, we have Roger Ver, who has created Bitcoin Cash out of Bitcoin this time last year, and owns the @Bitcoin Twitter handle, the RBTC Reddit subreddit, and also Bitcoin.com. And on all of those platforms, he absolutely keeps talking about Bitcoin as in Bitcoin Cash, his Bitcoin, but talking as it, like, that's the real Bitcoin, and what we'll call the original Bitcoin, Bitcoin Core. So he's kind of muddying the waters a lot, and he's got platforms to do it on. And although he's been in it for a long time, and he understands this technology and where it could go, he's kind of being a bit scammy with Bitcoin Cash. And so when you actually hear him say, yeah, Bitcoin like the original, Bitcoin in the paper, yeah, and you buy it, and we've got the original Bitcoin, Bitcoin Core is not, don't believe it. Bitcoin, what he calls Bitcoin Core, which I will always call Bitcoin, has been around longer, is much more secure, much more decentralized, much more used by businesses, and that's why it's about 10 times the price of Bitcoin Cash. Just be careful. Vitalik Buterin, here we go. This is the guy I mentioned earlier. He's the one that came up with the Ethereum blockchain. He wanted to do it smart contracts all on Bitcoin, but because Bitcoin was vociferous in the fact that they wanted a very, very secure architecture with very few attack surfaces, kind of if you open up the blockchain to scripts and such like, you have attack surfaces of all the hackers out there, and they stop that because they want it as pure as possible as a medium of value. So he, instead of creating smart contracts on Bitcoin, created Ethereum. And we will go into a little bit about why Ethereum is quite amazing in a minute. Charlie Lee created Litecoin. That was a 90 million transferred across countries under 30 seconds for 40p. If any, I'd love to do that, preferably in my favour. The Winklevoss twins. Well, I only had one picture of him, but you won't notice the fact that I cut and paste because they do look incredibly alike. But they own an American exchange called Gemini. It's a very good exchange. It's got very secure. It's got a lot of security around it. But they're very big proponents of regulation and are really pushing the regulation in the US for this space, which is kind of surely needed. 5 minutes? Oh. We might have to go longer if you guys want. It's up to you. Tim Draper bought a lot of Bitcoins in the early days from Silk Road when it was used for narcotics and buying drugs. Now, what's interesting about this is that everybody thinks that there's lots of drug people, hackers, using it for really bad means and buying drugs on the internet, but it's a public open ledger. Anybody can see any transaction out there. So in fact, what happened was that the enforcement department, the DEA of the US, looked into the Bitcoin blockchain. It's all open, all accessible. They did their chain analysis on it, realized who actually owned which wallet and where it was flowing, and they got all the Bitcoins back. So, although it's pseudo-anonymous, you've got authorities that do actually know who various different wallets are tied to, and in the future, you're going to have a lot more companies that kind of try and do analysis on these wallets transacting with each other. So we've got to be careful, and that might mean that privacy coins, like Monero, tend to be the way of the future. We don't know, but Monero is the de facto privacy coin. It mixes up the transactions, so therefore you do not know which transaction goes in and which transaction goes out. Yes, it can be used for nefarious means, but we've got to think larger than that. We've got to think about people that do earn a lot of money, that do want to keep their transactions private. Or the fact that your wife can actually look at your Bitcoin wallet online and go, oh, he sent it to this address, and this address is associated with this flower company. He's bought me flowers. You might not want to actually reveal that information. So we've got to be careful of things like that. And Nick Szabo was the one, even back in '98, who came up with the concept of smart contracts, and I think is a key part of possibly the Nakamoto team. We do take companies through a little bit of a flow chart as to whether they need blockchain. A lot of companies come up to us and say, we want to use blockchain for this, and I'm going, no, you don't. You just want a cloud-based distributed ledger, which is perfectly acceptable, and people do use blockchain, private blockchains, in their companies. They don't need crypto, and they use distributed ledgers on, like, say, AWS cloud systems, and they don't even need blockchains. We know cloud architecture very well. We know distributed databases very well. Yes, this is a different type of architecture for distributed databases, but it's much more inefficient than the current distributed databases that we currently have. And so it's only if you need the elements of permissionless, so anybody can access it, or immutability, nobody can change it, that you start to go down the blockchain route. You say that it will, well, somebody mentioned that it might disintermediate a lot of our jobs. Yes, but a lot of jobs will be created. We have blockchain digital strategists, which I think I'm one, don't know. community managers, social media marketers, specialist copywriters and bot developers are all the specialist type of jobs that we will see in this type of economy. They're a bit different from the current normal marketing jobs that you'll find, but yes, we will have slightly different jobs. ICOs, they start off like this with a beautiful white paper on their website, and then they get to the production, the test net that we call it, where they test it, and then they get to the production, and looks a bit dodgy, and then when they actually release the production, it's shockingly bad. So you do actually get some ICOs that have raised a lot of money and delivered very little. But people are still throwing money at this space. In 2017, it was 5.4 billion, and already we are at 6.3 billion. This was written a couple of months ago, so we're now at about 7 billion in 2018 of money that is thrown towards ICOs. What are ICOs? They're just ways to raise funds in a company, a much cheaper version of an IPO. Obviously, where you can actually print money or print tokens. We got to actually, let me clarify, coins are associated with blockchains. Tokens run on blockchains, but not associated with a direct blockchain. So Bitcoin is a coin. Ethereum is a coin. Others, like Funfair, as an example, they just run as a token on the Ethereum blockchain. So therefore, they use the underlying infrastructure of Ethereum, but they do not actually have their own blockchain. They rely on somebody else's blockchain. But there is uncertainty globally around ICOs. A lot of countries are clamping down on them because some of them are scams. And if we just take a look at how secure the Bitcoin and the Ethereum blockchain is as a protocol layer, with all the kind of layer 2 routing mechanisms on the second layer, then we might need, I'm going to be like Bill Gates here, we need one computer in every city. We may only see kind of a handful or 10s or 20s of blockchains, and then everything else runs on layer 2 technologies. Right. Have a look at this while I talk to you about it. This is the ICO environment. What happened? There we go. Come on. That's not even going. Hang on.
The market is stable.
Yeah, there we go. So this is the ICO environment in the last few years. It goes up to kind of January 18, where we had the height. But we had a few ICOs. Here's Ethereum here that starts off as a kind of a break off of Bitcoin, and Ethereum is really kind of an ICO platform, really, a way to raise funds for other organizations and other projects. But here we go. It starts to spawn a lot more investment in the economy and in the industry. And you're getting kind of other, there you go, Africa comes in here. And then bang. And that is the current ICO space at the moment. Now, the Petro. The Venezuelan Petro by Maduro, who states that he raised 5 billion, but then a corrupt dictator. Do we believe him? Probably not. Do we want to support it? Hell no. It's a very centralized system, and he's going to control it. And we don't want any part of it as part of the industry. So whilst he makes these bold claims that it's 5 billion, I don't think so. I think he's just lying. But what he's trying to do is, because his own fiat currency and his own printing mechanisms are rubbish, he's trying to do it digitally, and he's trying to force it down everybody's throats, and everybody is just turning to Bitcoin and Ethereum. So it's not going to last a long. EOS is now kind of raised far more than 2.5 billion, by the way, as well. Okay, we can continue to go on for a little bit longer. I've got a few more slides about scams and about, are we happy to carry on? I know. Yeah? Cool. Yeah, brilliant. Right, so Bitcoin, altcoins, and coins. That's what we kind of tend to call this industry. If we have so there's 1,500 cryptocurrencies on CoinMarketCap. Here we go. Here's CoinMarketCap. It's one of the best websites to go to understand the market capitalization of all of these, and you can kind of see the Bitcoin price is now at $6,600 per Bitcoin, and you have hundreds of them. And they all are doing slightly different things and slightly different rules and slightly different mechanisms. And we saw that 50 plus business use cases of blockchain, they're all doing something slightly differently within that space. And you know, the network of blockchains and the fact that there's data being transferred between them. Overall market cap, well, you can definitely see, there you go, you can definitely see that spike there back in January. It had a bit of a run up last year and reached $20,000 per Bitcoin, and it's basically had a bit of a torrid time this year. Here it was worth about 800 billion for the whole industry. Now let's put that into context. I said gold. The whole amount of gold in the world is about 6 trillion. If you were to take every asset, every store of value asset that we have on this planet, and we're talking buildings, we're talking cars, we're talking property, we're talking, you know, financial assets and company assets. If we take every single asset as a store of value, where rich people tend to put the value in something, we're talking about an 800 trillion marketplace. And we are currently, if we go to the right-hand side of this, we are currently on about 250 billion, is it? 270, there we go, 200, it's gone up in the last couple of days. 270 billion. Now, Apple is about 800 billion. That's one company. Apple will probably become the first $1 trillion company if Google or Facebook do not beat them to it. So we will have an industry of $1 trillion companies. But every single project in the blockchain space is only about 270 billion at the moment. So it's not even a third of an Apple. So there are a lot of people thinking that this will kind of grow. And of course, in a deflation environment, it will. But we have to be careful in some areas. So if I go back to the presentation, so you can only kind of purchase, we can only purchase Bitcoin and Ethereum with fiat currency. Fiat currency is what we call geographically bound currency by governments. You know, if they release a central bank releases currency, that's fiat currency. And only a few places actually allow you to buy Bitcoin and Ethereum and a couple of other cryptocurrencies. So Coinbase and Gemini are one of the best, the two best in the industry. They are US based. There are others in other countries that are starting to get what we call USD pairs, which means that they pair cryptocurrency with US dollars. So therefore you can register yourself, put in US dollars, and you can get Bitcoin or Ethereum out. There are even ATMs you can go to in London, and you can put your credit card in to get Bitcoin out. But we'll talk about those in a little bit because they give you paper wallets, and which aren't as secure. But you would go onto Coinbase or Gemini, you would register your details. Because they are financially regulated as far as their fiat currency is concerned, they have to go through various different mechanisms like KYC, Know Your Customer, and AML, which is anti-money laundering. So these are all financial industry terms to mean that you've got to make damn sure you know who is opening an account with you because you're dealing with money. And very few exchanges have gone through this laborious process for crypto. which means that only very few can take on USD or euros or British pounds. Coinbase can deal with all of those and give you cryptocurrency. And even the worst downside is that if you were to register today, it will take you a few months, probably, well, maybe a few weeks actually, because the market is in a bit of a downturn, to actually get accepted onto that platform and to make sure that you can then trade with normal currency. They need to know who you are. Mainly for tracking reasons for authorities, but because they have one leg. In the old slow money environment, and one leg in this crypto fast money digital environment. So you go and log on to these exchanges. There will be many more in the future, and there are a lot coming up. Things like Binance, KuCoin, Gemini, GDAX, Bittrex, BitMEX, and Huobi, they're all pretty good. Not all of them have USD pairings, but all of them are very good for exchanging cryptocurrencies. Binance is by far one of the best exchanges out there. It's only a year old, but it is amazing, and the guys behind it have a fantastic moral ethos behind them. They want to help the cryptosphere. They want to help the little person get on the ladder. They want cryptocurrency to be a revolution. They want it to be accessible by everybody, and they will make everything in their power to ensure that it's secure and it's easy to actually transfer these digital assets without the lot of regulations around the current kind of normal exchange space. But exchanges are open 24/7, 365 globally. You know, it's not an 8 to 4 job where the bell goes in the morning and 4 o'clock they all off down the pub. You know, this is 365 days a year, and anything can make the markets jittery, whether it's a country banning ICOs or banning Bitcoin, good luck to them, or whether it's anything else. The market is very fickle, and there's a lot of banks out there putting out rubbish, fake news. Yes, I'm not a big fan of Trump, but sometimes fake news does actually appear in this space, quite a lot, because everybody in the banking institutions realise that this is such a powerful medium of exchange and so quick and efficient. Yes, maybe sometimes slow when it's clogged, but it's efficient, and there's always a permanent record there, that they're worried about how this will change their legacy systems. We talked about coins versus tokens. Coins are a cryptocurrency that operates independently of any other platform. An example is Ethereum and Neo, which is a Chinese Ethereum. Again, a blockchain which you can run applications on, but this time in China. And tokens require another platform. Try and stay away from things like Bitfinex, BitGrail, Bithumb, Cryptopia. They've had a bit of issues. You will, if you get into this space, you will realise what are the good exchanges and what are the bad exchanges. Yes, there have been hacks, but mainly on exchanges, not necessarily blockchains. So if an exchange is insecure and doesn't look after your money, just like banks and vaults and maybe the Wild West where the cowboys went in to raid the bank, if they're young and they haven't got a good security, then that's when you get hacks.
Your password on an account can get hacked, can't it, regardless of whether it's got a blockchain supporting it or not?
Correct, it can. So private keys, yes, they can get hacked. You do not store private keys on a local machine or somewhere where it's easily accessible. It is your password to your bank account. In this industry, when you have a digital wallet, you are the bank. There is no fail-safe. So it's not as if, one thing we are very lucky in this country is that banks guarantee us a lot in our money. Only up to £85,000, but they do guarantee us that money if the bank goes up. Credit card, very good for buying holidays on. They guarantee, ATOL protected. They guarantee that money. In this space, nothing is guaranteed at the moment. There's no regulation around it. You are the bank. You get to decide what you do with your money, as opposed to the banks deciding what to do with your money, lending it out, making tons on on your money, but not giving it back to you in form of interest. But you've got to be careful. So private keys can be a long hash, but it can also be broken down into a cryptic phrase or, you know, a 12-word phrase. And a lot of people who have a lot of funds in this area tend to write that down, cut it up into 3 pieces, store it in various different places around their house or even in bank vaults. Because if you put these 12 words together, you can come up with a private key and you can then hack that private key. But that's only for one digital wallet. That's not the blockchain, obviously. So you've got to be careful. So, history of Bitcoin bubbles. In 2013, we had this massive run-up, this massive spike here, and it went to about $25 a Bitcoin. Massive run-up. And then it crashed to $4. And Bitcoin was dead. Poor old Bitcoin. It was a good kind of funny money digital scenario. Great, yes, but now no longer around. Or was it? Actually, yes, it was. It was still there in the background. And in 2014, we had another one. We had another speculated bubble. But, you know, people ask me, you know, is Bitcoin a speculative bubble? Yes, it is. Yes, it very much is. But so is the stock market, so is the car loans market, so is the student loans market, so is the dot-com era. You know, there are plenty of bubbles out there, and they all ebb and flow. At the moment, the stock market is at all-time high, especially in tech stocks. You know, Netflix has just managed to, you know, post an all-time high recently, and is now worth multiple billions and is on the tails of Google. You know, there is a massive fervour around tech stocks. So yes, there is a bubble there. It will pop, yes. Has Bitcoin popped? Yes, a few times. 2014, it popped again. Oh no, Bitcoin's dead. Really? It still carry on. It doesn't care about governments. It doesn't care about authority. It will always be there. It doesn't matter how many nodes you shut down, it's decentralized enough that there will be a machine out there that runs the Bitcoin blockchain. And so we had this run up in 2017, up to $20,000. And we've had it crash. And people are saying in the industry, it's crashed again. Is Bitcoin dead? Well, you make up your own mind, because I think that in a few years' time, it will be around again. So I've been in this space for a while, and, you know, people don't believe you. I mean, what they say is that, you know, first they laugh at you, then they think, you know, think it's funny money, and then they they question it, and then they don't believe it, and then the banks all kind of say, no, that can't happen, that can't be right, and then eventually they kind of look at the technology and they kind of think, actually, it's survived, you know, a number of these crashes.
What are the little blue arrows for?
That run up, that was a previous little spike.
Oh.
So that spike was, I think it went from about 50 cents to a whole $4. I mean, that's quite. So that was a little run, and then.
An 8-fold increase, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's quite significant.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, there seems to be a bit of an ebb and flow in this market. People seem to get really speculative about it, and all the big players kind of jump. What I'm talking about, the big players, I'm talking about the retail investors, the likes of you and me, that all pile in going, yes, we're going to make shitloads, and then it dumps, and everybody loses money, except for the few that have been intelligent enough to get out when it was at its peak, and then buy in back when it's low. And that's happened a few times. But when we talk about this market, we're still talking about 270 billion at the moment, after its height of 800 billion. And when you start thinking of pension funds, and you start thinking of institutional money and sovereign wealth, and other such exchanged funds that want to get into this space, wanted to be part of a pension portfolio, and eventually will bring more liquidity to the system, which makes it less volatile, then you realise that maybe there's just some headway to go. But the only way that they can do that is if they get regulation on their tokens. They have regulated security tokens, because a security token then has a foot in the legal process. And so therefore, once you are deemed a security, you abide by different rules, and you are then sued by different rules. And so therefore, you need some kind of regulation around security tokens. And by security tokens, I mean anything you use to raise funds.
But
You could,
you sue against all of it? You couldn't, could you?
the developers or the people that are running the project. But there will be a case like that. Nobody's been sued yet, but there will be. But then again, if you were to invest in Bitcoin over these years, yes, you'd make a nice profit. But if you were to invest in any of the other thousands that were a part of this industry, then maybe your money wouldn't go as far as an investment as if you invested in Bitcoin. You've got a number of different wallets in which you store this cryptocurrency in. Most common is a mobile wallet like this. This is called blockchain.info. It's a very good wallet, digital wallet, because it allows you to have your private key. Some wallets do not allow you to have your private key. They look after your money for you, just like banks. And then they get hacked, and then you lose all your money. Find something that allows you to have your private key and allows you to store it in the fashion that you want to store it and that you want to transact with. There is risk associated with this. Weigh up the opportunities and the trade-offs between what risk you're happy to take and what risk you're happy to put in. MetaMask is very good. It's a way that the Chrome browser uses to access the blockchain, but it also allows you your private keys. So you can store the money in a way that it is recoverable if you were to lose that money within the browser window. So I have that running on my Chrome browser, and I have my private key stored at home in a safe. Maybe many safes. I'm not going to tell you where I live though. But it's an easy way of actually interacting with the blockchain, but actually in a relatively secure way. MetaCert is a very good decentralized platform that checks scam sites and will notify you if you are going to a scam site. And we'll take a look at an example scam site in a minute. Paper wallets, I mentioned, if you go to ATMs, you put your credit card in, get crypto out. Paper wallets will have your private key on them. So do not hold them up to the webcam, because that has happened. And drains were fun. Funds were drained. Drains were fun. Funds were drained, and that person never did that anymore. What you want is a cold wallet like this. So this is a Ledger Nano. And this is a cold wallet, so it has security, cryptographic security behind it. I have a few different pins that I use with this. So even if I'm held up at gunpoint, I can put one pin in and it'll only show that I've got $10 worth of Bitcoin. Yeah, you can have that. But it might not show you what else I've got on here. There's a lot of security. Pass it around, you can have a look at that. And what I've also got is an actual Bitcoin token. So you can pick these up relatively cheaply. I'm afraid they're not worth $6,000. I'm quite happy if you want to take one home for £10, that's fine. They're about, kind of £10 worth, but it's just an example of what a Bitcoin can look like. Kind of quite useful to kind of have a tangible element or something that's digital and not tangible. So, pass those around and have a look at those whilst we talk about those. But this is an example of what your digital wallet will look like. Here's the public address, like your account number. It's just a load of characters. I know the resolution isn't great, but it's just a bunch of characters and numbers, and it's a QR code. And you would just scan your QR code, and that's a transaction. Common mistakes to avoid. Sending tokens to the wrong address. If you send Bitcoin to a Bitcoin Cash address, you'll lose it. If you send Bitcoin Cash to a Bitcoin address, you'll lose it. These addresses are particular to the currency that you're purchasing. Sending the wrong amount, fat fingers or dyslexic fingers tends to happen, and you want to send 2 Bitcoin, you send 200. Oh, that's 6,000 a pop. You made a big mistake. But only if you have 6,000 in your wallet, because the blockchain itself, as we've already discussed, if you don't have that amount of money, it won't allow it. So it's fine. Not turning on two-factor authentication. If anything in this industry has taught me is how to be more secure with my funds. and how to secure your funds in a digital environment. And two-factor authentication is an absolute must. Anytime you go on an exchange or a website like Coinbase, like Binance, like Cryptopia, or whatever some of the others are, put on two-factor authentication. It's one of the first things you should always do. Maybe even tie it to your mobile phone, but there are some scams that are now targeting mobile phone users. And it is sometimes quite easy with social engineering to actually get your password into your Gmail account then kind of resets your two-factor authentication. Once your two-factor authentication is reset, you can set up a different two-factor authentication. You can confirm the draining of those funds into your wallet with that new two-factor authentication. Be very careful. And with two-factor authentication, you will get a recovery phrase for your two-factor authentication. That is important to secure as well, maybe not as much as your private key, but still secure that two-factor authentication element. So this is what it looks like on Coinbase, security and turn on two-factor authentication and go through the process. This is what it looks like on Google Authenticator, and this is what it looks like on Binance. Using simple passwords, I'm not going to say too much there. I think we all know. Passwords. That was my password. Yeah, no, forget it. That's crackable easily. Believing in free money or the next hottest ICO or altcoin. Yes, there's so many people out there that are shilling their own coins by shilling. They are mentioning a coin without saying that they have an actual stake in that coin. They are not disclosing that they own that coin. They just want it to pump. They want it to go through the roof, or as we say in the industry, to the moon. It's crazy vernacular, but we'll talk about a bit of the vernacular in a minute. Sharing your private key or linking your wallet to a scammer's wallet. So, when I first got into this industry, I thought I could pick up a nice a coin by forking, so I linked my wallet to a scammer's wallet. Thank you very much. He took all my funds. Well, not all of my funds, because I actually transferred most of them out, but he took 400 quid out of my wallet. So that digital wallet is now a burned wallet. I now no longer use that because I know it can be accessed, and I have a brand new wallet with new private key, and I make sure I don't link that private key to any other wallet because I don't want to lose that money again, but it certainly teaches you a lot in this industry. Scams to avoid. Here's a good website. My Ether wallet, very good. It's linked to the Ethereum protocol, Ethereum blockchain. It's very good for storing your coins, and it also gives you your private key. What's not to like about it? Brilliant. Let's go to this website and let's enter our details. Is everyone happy with going to this website? Yeah, all good. Is there anything about that website that looks a little out of place?
Asking you for a password. No login?
Yes, no, but my Ethereum, it will ask for a password, and your password is linked to your private key. And I think MetaMask will ask you for a password, but it's just what's in the background. Well, have a look at the URL. The URL is www.myetherwallet.com. This is a scam site. It's got absolutely perfect renditioning of all of the images that is on the normal website. If you were to install Metacert in your browser, it would flag this up as a scam site. But what you do is you put this up and you get people to type in their password, and you have something running in the background that gets their private key and gets all their funds. So be very careful with what website you go to. It's sometimes very easy to make money in this industry where we have no regulation and people do not understand this space.
It's very similar, I suppose, to phishing emails.
Yes, massively. Yeah, and phishing emails are coming along, and I've seen many phishing emails. It's, if you've got some good Russian hackers that can pull together some decent code, they will do anything in this digital economy, this digital space, to nick your money. And that's another reason why the Bitcoin blockchain, I believe, is so secure, because it's been out there in public for 9 years. It has had so many hackers try to actually break it, and it hasn't been broken. It hasn't been hacked. Now, digital wallets have, private keys have, and exchanges have. And that's where you hear of all the money going. So, Beware, fraudulent accounts. Here we have Vitalik Buterin saying, if you send me 0.1 ETH, I will send you nothing because I am too lazy. That is actually him writing that tweet. Very funny tweet, but whenever Vitalik Buterin writes a tweet, you have this, who says, I'm donating 400 Ethereum to the ETH community. The first 200 transactions with 0.2 ETH sent to the address below will receive 2 ETH in return. Sounds fantastic. Let's do that. And then when you have a look, because it's public, it's open, at that address, you'll see it gradually rack up in ethers. And I've seen it get to 20,000 very easily. And this is a problem with Twitter. And even Vitalik knows this is a problem with Twitter. And if you have a look, they've used his picture, they've used his name, and I'm sorry it's a bit blurry here, but it's Vitalik Butter. And now they're even trying to replicate the blue tick. So Twitter is under siege from these hackers that try to pretend there's somebody else. And people go, oh, Vitalik has just said I got some free money. Fantastic, I believe it. For goodness sake, what did I say? You can't get a free lunch. Just be careful. Everyone's out there to get your money. People don't know this space yet. People are very immature about this space and what it is.
Well, that's just the equivalent of the Nigerian government ministry needs
Yes.
to transfer money into the country.
Exactly.
Needs a little bit from you to
Exactly.
send you millions.
It's just a more efficient way of doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, Kevin Ballinger, who is an experienced graphic designer with a clear focus on identities and illustration. He looks cool. I want him to be part of my ICO. He was a part of somebody's ICO, and then somebody realised that he looks a lot like Ryan Gosling. And yes, it is a picture of Ryan Gosling. In fact, take a look at this. This is Cryptonex Labs. I'll just quickly pull this up. Cryptonex Labs. Yeah, Sweden set to become first major country to officially adopt cryptocurrency as their official currency. Fantastic. Oh, look, it's even got a counter that's counting up. Quick, number of coins sold so far. I've got to get in quick because it's going up. But previously there was a beautiful video that played there, but obviously something's happened with that. Maybe actually my security system's kind of. But look, oh, it's nice. Look how it all sweeps in. First government-approved currency. Current price of Sweden's official coin, 81 pence. So 250 will buy you 308. That sounds brilliant. Hang on a sec, Bill Gates likes this, Eric Schmidt likes this, Richard Branson, Peter Thiel, Al Gore, Kim.com, Jesus, whatever, It sounds brilliant. Look at the potential gains you will get. It's safe and secure. It's decentralized. It's secure. It's public. It's anonymous. It's digital. It's stable. It's the best time to buy. It's a scam. Obviously. I mean, it's crazy what some of these people are going to put on a website. And this has caught people.
Well, how can it be a scam if Richard Branson likes it?
Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, I mean that's just one example. There's another one called Faithcoin that wanted to put Bible verses on the blockchain. Fantastic. Good luck with you. Stealing private keys or link models we talked about, pump and dump, Ponzi schemes. Yes, there was BitConnect, which was a Ponzi scheme. It even had a pyramid on their website. Ridiculous. Clipboard attacks are becoming very, very interesting at the moment, but they're new. And basically it means that when you're copying an address that you want to send money to on your computer, normally a Windows machine, that's one of the reasons why it's good to use a Mac in this space, because it's a bit more of an secure ecosystem. As soon as you paste, it actually interacts with the clipboard, the Windows clipboard underneath, and it pastes a different address in. So you've got to be very careful. You've got to check your addresses. 51% attacks. God, do I go into this? Jesus, that's a whole other area. If you have a very young blockchain, you can buy a lot of hashing power, a lot of CPU power, and you can mine blocks quicker than anybody else. And so therefore you can double spend, and therefore you can create your own kind of version of the blockchain. But it's only for very, very young, new proof of work blockchains. Of course, if you were to do this with the Bitcoin blockchain, it would take you $600,000 and 1 hour to rewrite one block. And so it takes $600,000 for 1 hour to write one block, and then it will take you another 600,000 to write the previous block. And while all this is going on, other miners are still creating the blockchain, and so therefore you've then got to kind of reverse all of those as well. And in fact, you've got to reverse the whole blockchain if you wanted to do a 51% attack on Bitcoin, and it is close to impossible at the moment. Somebody argued vociferously with me, what if China spun up all their servers and kind of decided to attack the Bitcoin blockchain with a 51% attack? Yes, they could. It would take a few years to get that many servers. It would take many years to actually kind of have enough graphic interface cards to actually have that hash rate. And don't you think someone would notice? Yeah. So it's a bit more difficult. But there are fake exchanges, cloud mining schemes, high yield investment programs, auto trading bots, fraudulent account managers. You do have to be careful in this space. There is a bit of language associated with this space. FUD, fear, uncertainty. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt is a common one. FOMO, fear of missing out. So when a coin is at its all-time high, it's ATH. Everyone piles in. That's why a lot piled in when it was kind of $15,000 and it went up to $20,000, and then everybody got dumped on. Just be careful at buying at its all-time height. It's always good if you are to invest in this area to do what we call dollar cost averaging, which means you put in a small. If you say £1,000 you want to put into this space, you put kind of £50 in or £100 in, and then you wait. If the market goes down, you can pick up more for another £100. But if it goes up, fine. But over the course of a time frame where you're willing to just drip feed it in, it's actually much more beneficial. It's a bit like compound interest. Right, pump and dump schemes. What you don't want is to get wrecked. Loads of people are hodling at the moment, which is a bastardized version of hold or hold on for dear life. It just means that you're, like mine, your wallet and the amount that you have has been crippled because of the bear market, but you're just holding because at some point it will come back.
Is that you at the bottom then?
No. If only. I can't manipulate prices now. I've only got a very small amount in. I did sell a fair bit in January, and it was just a good decision because I kind of saw the market turning.
He's the one that dumped.
Yeah. I dumped all of it. Yeah. No, I affected the market. Yeah.
You can see it on that graph.
Yeah. I'm going to sell that 50 billion Zimbabwean note for millions. This time next year. The biggest cryptocurrency scams, we've kind of touched on this, but a lot of them were exchange hacks rather than actual individual hacks, or they were digital wallet hacks rather than actual blockchain hacks. Mt. Gox was probably the largest that we saw. I was thinking of getting back in October 2013, and when I saw this, I got scared off for a good couple of years because it was just the Wild West there. Well, they had a smart contract running and kind of hit the smart contract, and it all went up, and they got £450 million worth of ether, which in today's money, even after it's dipped, is kind of billions. So, is cryptocurrency the future? This is the last slide, by the way. Well, it brings a lot of benefits to capital markets. It brings a lot of liquidity to capital markets. But imagine a world where you can buy without a merchant, where you can bet without a bookie, where you can get insurance without an underwriter, or access finance and loans without a bank, trade without an exchange, purchase commodities without a broker, have law without lawyers, courts and judges, create assets without an issuer, secure escrow without an agent, have internet, maybe without an ISP. Verify records without a notary, establish reputation and credit without a credit agency, and create identity without a government. This could possibly be the Internet 3.0. And there's a lot coming along. There are going to be regulated exchanges. There are going to be decentralized exchanges which cannot be shut down ever. And there's going to be central banks that start to use this. They are going to create a digital version of the dollar. Primarily because they do not want China to go into Bitcoin and dump all their US dollars. Because that would really muck up the US economy. So, that's really all I have. I hope you found that of use and hope you go out there understanding this technology a bit more.